is April 21st, 10 o'clock. It's 10:01 a.m. We are here for the IBR Executive Steering Group meeting. We're excited to have all of the participants here. We recognize that today is a big day in the region, and so we are going to work to make sure that we get through the agenda that we have in front of us. Even though it's a 3-hour agenda, I believe if we all exercise significant restraint, we will be able to get through everything that we need to. That is not to say that we don't want to ensure that we hear questions, get comments from you as it relates to the information that's going to be shared, because it is very important information. That said, we will have opportunities to connect with individual members of the ESG to the extent that that's necessary, and perhaps small groups as well, in less formal settings, to ensure that we're able to answer all of your questions and address all of your concerns. So I'm going to read through a couple of items, administrative items, to ensure that we are following the protocols expected for a public meeting. So we will have closed captions in English and in Spanish. English closed captions are available within Zoom and YouTube. Users can follow this link below, https://ibr.news/captions to view both English and Spanish captions in a separate browser window. Next slide. How to access closed captions. At the bottom middle of your screen, you should see a menu of options. If you can't see the menu, hover your mouse over the bottom middle of the screen. Click on the CC icon and a separate window with captions will appear. Webinar participation tips. We'd like to again thank you for joining us today. We encourage panelists to turn on your video. Please keep your audio on mute when not speaking, and before speaking, please state your name and affiliation to help attendees identify who is talking. If you experience technical difficulties, please contact program staff at 360-329-6744. For public input, there will be an opportunity for you to provide brief public input later in the meeting today. To submit input after the meeting, email comments to info@interstatebridge.org with ESG Public Comment in the subject line, or call 888-503-6735 and state ESG Public Comment in your message. The meeting ground rules: honor the agenda, listen to understand, and ask questions to clarify. Let's be hard on the problems and soft on the people. Address interests and seek common ground, and provide a balance of speaking time. Our agenda, again, it's packed, and we're going to try to get through all of it in 2 hours. It's scheduled for 3 hours, however, with several overviews, technical overviews and data sharing on aux lanes and transit. And then we're going to have an options analysis and review on the modified locally preferred alternative, have public comments, and then we'll talk about next steps. And so we, as I mentioned in the early conversation, based on the fact that we don't have a lot of time today and people will need to step away, we're going to forego having the roundtable conversation regarding updates from each of the jurisdictional or agency or organizational partners. I hope that's okay with everyone that's on the call. Unless there's something burning that you'd like to share, please let me know that by raising your hand or unmuting yourself. All right, great. But I will acknowledge the members of the ESG who are in attendance or their alternates. And so in the case of the Oregon Department of Transportation, we have Lindsay Baker, Assistant Director of Government and External Relations. From the Washington State Department of Transportation, Secretary Raja Millar. From the City of Portland, Commissioner Joanne Hardesty. From the City of Vancouver, Mayor Ann McInerney Ogle. From the Southwest Washington Regional Transportation Council, we have Executive Director Matt Ransom. From Metro, we have Metro Council President Lynn Peterson. From TriMet, we have General Manager Sam Dessou. From C-Trans, CEO Sean Donahue. From the Port of Portland, Executive Director Curtis Robinhold. From the Port of Vancouver, CEO Juliana Marler. And our CAG co-chairs Lynn Valenter and Ed Washington. Sorry for going so fast for our interpreters, but again, trying to get through all of this very quickly. I'd like to acknowledge very quickly that our administrator, program administrator, Greg Johnson, is in a funeral. His cousin died unexpectedly, and so he is in a funeral service. As soon as he's able to leave that service, he will be joining the call. But we do have Frank Green and Ray Maybe, assistant program administrators, on the call as well. So we are able to proceed. And I would ask if Frank or Ray, would you have anything that you'd like to share as we begin to dig in?
Thanks, Melissa. No, I think really just we've got a lot to do today, and appreciate everybody's willingness to dig in.
Yeah, I'll say the same. I think we've got to trying to get done through things pretty quickly for other things that are going on. So thank you everyone for attending, and go ahead and listen, move forward.
All right, sounds good. So so that we won't delay any further, I'm going to ask that Ryan LaProuse, who is our lead planner for the program, I see you there, join the call. And we are going to begin a conversation walking through technical data and sharing information on auxiliary lanes. So, Ryan.
Perfect. Good morning. So I'm going to go through, as Millicent said, Ryan LaProuse, Transportation Planning Manager. So I'm going to go through the introduction to ramp connections or auxiliary lanes. So next slide, please. And Millicent, if there's questions, just interrupt me and we'll kind of stop and answer questions.
Yeah, I will be monitoring that and make sure that we let you know.
Perfect. So here's a list of the purpose and need and the desired outcomes. So this is not the full list of the desired outcomes, but we wanted to highlight the desired outcomes that can be closely tied to ramp connections. We've hopefully captured all the ones that are relevant, though there are certainly some additional ones that could be kind of included or thought of as auxiliary lanes. You recall this group kind of discussed these and approved these desired outcomes last fall in kind of the October timeframe. We encourage you to think about these highlighted desired outcomes as we go through the trade-offs and benefits of our auxiliary lane discussion today. So I'm not going to read these. I think everybody's kind of got this information in advance. So we'll just kind of go to the next slide. Stop for a quick second so the public can see it. So we have the top 4 kind of main purpose and need items. We then have the climate change and resiliency section added here on the bottom. And then if you go to the next slide, we have some equity desired outcomes, and again, I've highlighted that. So I will go through these quickly today. So next slide. So we acknowledge that ramp-to-ramp connections are not the only way to address these outcomes. In this meeting, we're going to focus on the data specific to auxiliary lanes, but we also understand there's an overall program we'll approach and look at a variety of strategies to address these outcomes. For example, in doing some of this analysis, we're already starting to look at how ramp meters and specific ramp metering freeway to freeway connections, how those can help kind of with reducing the congestion and some of those takeaways. So here's an initial list of some of the strategies that we anticipate kind of using to kind of address some current purpose and need issues, and then some combination of solutions are kind of identified on here in the second bullet, including the third bullet with variable rate tolling. As we go through the NEPA process, we'll have more information as well that'll kind of dive into station access and active transportation potential, trip potential, and some additional information on interchanges and ramp information. So that'll be some ongoing work that'll be done over the next year. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to get into some background information and traffic design information related to kind of current baseline conditions. And then I'm going to get into what are auxiliary lanes or ramp-to-ramp connections. And then I'll get into the analysis. So it's kind of a 3-step presentation today. Next slide. So we've got 7 closely spaced interchanges in our program area. As you can see, desirable interchange spacing is 2 miles with a minimum of 1 mile. All of our interchanges are less than that, with many of them kind of identified about half-mile spacing. Close interchange spacing require users to make quick decisions in short distances at high speeds, including reading guide signs, lane changes, and diverging and merging onto and off of the freeway. Next slide. So for existing data, we're using 2019 as our kind of base. We've supplemented that with some additional 2021 counts as needed to fill in the gaps. We're following standard practice by FHWA, FTA, WashDOT, ODOT that's using kind of pre-pandemic timeframe as understanding for current information. So that's why we went back and collected 2019 information as kind of our base, but we did supplement that for any gaps that we had. The graphic there kind of shows some of the information we've collected: peak period volumes, daily volumes, congestion information, bridge lift information, safety information. So for safety and bridge lift, we've actually collected 5 years worth of data as kind of the standard practice. Collected freight information, transit, active transportation, and then origin and destination patterns that are using the bridge, as well as kind of the interchanges just in our program area. Next slide, please. So this graphic is showing our current 2019 volumes on the I-5 Interstate Bridge and the I-205 Glen Jackson Bridge. So on the I-5 Bridge in 2019, there were 143,000 average weekday users. On the Glen Jackson Bridge is almost 170,000. The bar chart on the left there kind of shows during previous planning what the volumes were during the 2005 timeframe when that project was started, and you can kind of see the growth. There's been about 12% growth between 2005 and 2019. That's about 1% per year. That's typical, the average for freeways, kind of in urban metro areas. So it's kind of following those same patterns. So we just kind of wanted to show how the volumes are today and what they were in the past. Next slide. So this graphic is showing freight volumes as well as general purpose vehicles. The bar charts on the left are the Interstate Bridge. The bar charts on the right are the Glen Jackson Bridge. You can see, so I'm going to focus in on the freight. It's kind of the number on the top. So we've got 14,000 freight vehicles traveling across the Interstate Bridge in 2019. This is about 10% of the daily volume. It's an increase from 8% that it was during the previous planning project. And on the I-205 bridge, it's about 6.5% on a daily basis, the 11,300 freight vehicles, which was an increase from 5.5% during previous planning. So what this is showing you, that freight is a critical component. Those are high general percentages. And you can see that I-5 is kind of the corridor of choice for freight, with both Port of Vancouver, Port of Portland, as well as industrial areas on both sides of the river, the Columbia Corridor and the Columbia Industrial Area, just on both sides of the river, located along I-5. Next slide. This, I want to show you kind of hourly profiles. There's two examples here. The bar chart on the left is kind of showing you total vehicles, and this is northbound peak period, northbound direction only. So it's a 24-hour period. So you can see the volumes kind of increasing overnight. They're pretty low, less than 1,000 vehicles an hour. They kind of increased about 3,000 in the AM, kind of then continued to increase most of the day to about 5,000 vehicles per hour, kind of in the PM peak. That's the peak direction. The graph on the right-hand side is actually the freight vehicle trip distribution. I want to show you that freight actually peaks in the middle of the day. They're trying to avoid the peak congested periods in the AM and PM peak. And you can see them trying to peak in the middle of the day. That's when they can. There are some shipments and trips that they require them to go in the peak. So you can still see they're about 300, kind of 200 to 300 in the AM and PM peak period, but actually peak in the middle of the day. So it's critical to understand that travel pattern as well. Next slide. So here I want to talk about origin and destination patterns of who use the Interstate Bridge. So I'm going to walk you through the graphic here. So we've kind of got OD patterns. There's 4 lines there. Kind of the through trip is the turquoise. So it's about 15% start outside of the program area. North of SR 500, this is the southbound AM peak, and go all the way through the program area. So about 15% go through to through. The other 85% get on and or off at one of our 7 interchanges. So you can see the individual patterns there. So we've got the 18% start north of our program area, get off at one of our ramps, kind of south of the bridge. You've got the red number there showing 30% that get on one of the interchanges north of the bridge and go all the way through our southern program area. And then the turquoise, or excuse me, the kind of Carolina blue, light blue, there is about 40% get on and off. So what we're really showing you is there's a lot of influence at these interchanges and lots of heavy volumes that get on and off. So a lot of influence with our interchanges. So 85% kind of southbound are getting on and off. If you go to the next slide, I'll show you the similar pattern for northbound. So this is northbound PM peak. 75% of our trips get on and or off one of our interchanges. About 25% are going through to through, but there's a lot of interaction in these outer kind of outer lanes on the freeway today. Next slide. Now I'm going to show you some individual ramp volumes. So I'll orient you to the graphic here. So we've got, this is AM peak 1 hour volumes. I want to kind of explain. So the graphic on the right-hand side are kind of the northbound volumes going up northbound, and the volumes on the left-hand side are the southbound volumes. I've got them color coded by kind of 2 ramps. So you get the on ramps are the turquoise and the off ramps are kind of the dark blue. So the main piece, other piece of information that's on here is mainline volumes are kind of in black. Those are the mainline volumes at the top of the screen. In the middle of the screen across the river, kind of showing you your volume across the river, and then the southern extents. So important to understand here kind of our heavy on and off ramps and which ones those are. So SR 500 up at the top, there's about 2,000 vehicles per hour come on at SR 500. Continuing south, you've got Mill Plain bringing on about 1,400. You've got SR 14 having about 1,000 vehicles coming on. So really heavy flows coming on to get across the river to get to destination south of the river. South of the river, you can see Marine Drive ramp, for example, it's about 1,800 vehicles get off at that ramp. And then you've got the Denver Victory Interstate ramp that has about 1,000 people getting off there. For the most part, AM peak flow is southbound. So I will not talk too much about the northbound flows here. I'll go to the next slide to kind of orient you to. So these are the existing PM volumes. I want to show you just kind of the relative scale of volumes that are getting on at some of these ramps. So we've got a lot of critical interchanges, SR 500, Mill Plain, SR 14, Marine Drive. So you can kind of see the relative scale of these flows. These are freeway volumes, not local road kind of volumes. This is kind of the importance here. So going in the northbound direction, again, starting at the south on the right-hand side of the graph, you got about 1,000 coming on at Victory Boulevard. You got about 1,500 getting on at Marine Drive. So those are full lane worth of traffic that is coming on at those ramps. You then get across the bridge, you got SR 14 getting off about 1,100. You've got SR 14 on ramp bringing on 1,500. You got Mill Plain bringing on 1,500, and then up at the top you've got the SR 500 ramp again over 2,000 vehicles per hour. So it's heavy flows getting off. So really trying to understand what are the flows, what are the patterns. One other thing I want to point out on this sheet is, for the most part, I told you southbound AM peaks kind of in the southbound direction, or AM peaks in the southbound direction, PM peaks in the northbound direction. But there are some ramps that specifically are actually higher in the off peak, and that's due to their patterns or their flows. So a good example of that here is SR 14 southbound on and off ramp actually peak in the PM. So we kind of use that information to help us understand the designs that are needed for the number of lanes and the number of lanes at some of these ramp terminals and ramp designs. So wanted to orient everybody to that. So let's go to the next slide, please. Now I want to talk about bottlenecks. We've got 3 bottlenecks that are in the project area or influence the project area. So we've got a bottleneck at the bridge northbound at the 7 hours today, lasts from 12:30 to 7:30. We've got a northbound bottleneck at the bridge. Southbound, similarly at the bridge, you've got a bottleneck, but it's only 3 hours. So you got about 10 hours of congestion at the interstate bridge today in 2019. The other bottleneck I want to identify is south of our project area on I-5, down near the Rose Quarter and the I-5, I-405 split. There's a kind of current existing bottleneck that actually backs up and influences the program area. So we need to understand that as well. So there's about 4 hours of congestion south of the project area that backs up and starts impacting the project area. And I'll show you some heat maps or congestion maps later that kind of show some of this information in a little more detail. Next slide. The last few things I'm going to get into here in the existing baseline is safety. So we collected, as I mentioned, for our 5-year period from 2015 to 2019, there were over 1,800 crashes. This is showing you kind of 2 different charts. We have a chart by hour, how many crashes occurred, and these are summarized by type. And then we have the by type crashes on the right-hand side. You start at the top of the pie and work your way around. So rear ends, about 55% of the collisions, those are kind of related to heavily congested conditions. Next, you've got the side swipe being about 20%. Those are related to kind of short merges, weaves, and congestion. You then have the fixed object, which are kind of about 15%, which are related to kind of substandard features. And then all other crashes kind of relating to bike ped, as well as other overturning and other types of crashes are lumped into that final 10%. The graph on the left kind of shows you how the volumes kind of how the crashes increase during the congested period. So you see kind of the little AM spike and the PM spike there, where there's kind of the two little bumps in those are when the majority of the crashes and the congestion are occurring. But throughout the day, there's quite a few crashes, so about 1,800. And then we also summarize the same information by severity. So for those 1,800 collisions, we had 7 fatal crashes and 17 serious injury crashes over the 5-year period. Last slide, please. So the short merge.
Ryan, before you move on, sorry, Commissioner Hardesty has a question.
Thank you.
Sorry, he was on a roll. I didn't want to interrupt, but if you could go back one slide, please. You made a statement of fact about the 55% rear ends that is due to congestion. What did you base that statement on?
So I didn't mean to make that was a fact. That is a general trend. So a lot of rear end collisions, property damage only collisions are related to congestion. You kind of see the spiking there, Commissioner Hardesty, where on the hourly chart, you can see those kind of spiking up, those kind of orange collisions and increasing. So they are kind of typically are related to congestion. So you see that congestion, but even in the other periods where there's not congestion, there still is rear end. So I don't want to make that conclusion that is the only thing that causes rear end is congestion. Rear end collisions occur at other times as well. So
yeah, I would say speed causes a lot more rear end collisions than congestion, but I guess that's a conversation for another day. But I didn't want that to just be left on the record as if that was fact. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty.
So the last thing here, I'll just summarize kind of the safety data. So the short merge, diverge, and weaving areas, plus the congested conditions and bridge lifts. I didn't get into the bridge lift information today because we're trying to go quickly, but bridge lifts also kind of, we've got almost 1 bridge lift a day, kind of in our period, about 320 plus bridge lifts a year. We've collected that information as well. So that's adding to kind of the safety issues. So all of these are kind of contributing to the high number of crashes in the IBR program area. So I was going to stop here, Millicent, see if there's any questions on the baselining information before I continue on.
I don't see any hands, Ryan. I'll give folks a few more seconds. I believe we can go ahead.
Okay, let's move on. So now I'm going to define kind of what are ramp-to-ramp connections or auxiliary lanes. So ramp-to-ramp connections to facilitate acceleration, deceleration, weaving, merging, and diverging automobiles and trucks between 2 or more interchanges. We've got a graphic here and we've got a video coming up in a minute. So the graphic on the top shows you without auxiliary lanes, what's going to happen. So you got a truck there and a vehicle in the outer lane where they've got to make a decision. Somebody's got to slow down, somebody's got to speed up for them to merge onto the freeway. Same type of thing occurs at the diverging point. So that a top example shows you without auxiliary lanes. We have a section on the bottom that shows you with auxiliary lanes. That same truck and vehicle come on, the truck's coming on, the auxiliary lane speeds up in its space and then merges over. I'm going to let the video do a lot of talking for me here. So if we go to the next slide, I've got a video that kind of shows an example for us as well.
The Interstate Bridge provides a critical connection between Oregon and Washington that supports local jobs and families and is a vital trade route for regional, national, and international economies. With over 143,000 vehicles crossing the Interstate Bridge each weekday, the area experiences 7 to 10 hours of congestion, affecting commuters, freight transportation, and public transit. Additionally, the area's current crash rate is over 3 times higher than statewide averages, with collisions resulting not just in fender benders, but fatalities as well. One of the factors that contributes to safety issues and congestion in the Interstate Bridge area is the lack of auxiliary lanes across the bridge and near the surrounding interchanges. Without auxiliary lanes, drivers are forced into through lanes to slow down or speed up as they are entering or exiting the roadway, slowing traffic down and increasing the chance of collisions. Auxiliary lanes are short lanes designed to give drivers distance to accelerate or decelerate before entering or exiting the roadway. They are not through lanes and are not the same as adding an additional lane. They are connections that reduce bottlenecks and optimize traffic flow by giving drivers space to merge safely. This allows for more efficient movement through the corridor, improving safety, helping to relieve congestion with better traffic flow, and reducing emissions from idling vehicles. There are currently 7 closely spaced interchanges in the Interstate Bridge area along I-5. While the standard spacing for these kinds of interchanges is 2 miles, these interchanges are all less than a mile apart, resulting in substantial weaving and merging for drivers. Auxiliary lanes are currently being used within the program area, such as along Mill Plain and 4th Plain in Vancouver and Marine Drive in Portland. However, they do not exist on or near the bridge where a majority of congestion and collisions occur. The interstate bridge is a vital piece of infrastructure for our community and the economy. It is imperative that we do everything possible to improve the safety of our roads for everyone.
Next slide. So today, the image here kind of shows you an example of context of our program area. The conversation we're focused on today is the number of auxiliary lanes across the river only, but I wanted to show you that they do exist kind of north and south of the project area today. So in the northbound direction, as the video just showed, we've got an auxiliary lane between Marine Drive and Hayden Island. We've got an auxiliary lane between SR14 Mill Plain, between Mill Plain all the way to SR500. You can see there that it extends beyond one interchange and has 4th Plain add into it in the middle there. In the southbound direction, you've actually got 2 auxiliary lanes that come on at SR500. As I pointed out, the volumes earlier being over 2,000, that's 1/2 lanes that are kind of worth of volume. So they bring on 2 auxiliary lanes in that location today due to the short spacing between SR500 and 4th Plain. It actually drops one of those auxiliary lanes at 4th Plain. You then pick up a second aux lane again at 4th Plain and drop both of those at Mill Plain. Similar to continuing south between Mill Plain and SR14, there's an aux lane. Again, nothing across the bridge, only 3 through lanes. And then south of the river, you've got between Hayden Island and Marine Drive, there's an aux lane, and between Marine Drive and Victory. So wanted to show you that these exist throughout the project area as well as the Portland metro region. There's examples down in on the I-405 bridge, down in downtown Portland, as well as other locations up in Vancouver that have examples of auxiliary lanes. So I wanted to show you these are a common practice that is used in the industry with short interchange spacing. Next slide. So I wanted to read through these for you. So we got design considerations that are used throughout kind of what we're thinking about for the IBR program and why we're considering aux lanes and other features to kind of help deal with those baseline issues that I showed earlier in the part of the presentation. We got traffic congestion, about 10 hours today at the bridge. We got the interchange spacing that doesn't allow for adequate time for vehicles to make those on-off decisions. We got the heavy on-ramp traffic volumes. We got conflicts between through regional and local traffic. We got the freight requirements and their volumes, as well as their origin destination patterns that are different than the commuters. And the importance there of Mill Plain as well as Marine Drive for freight. Next slide. We got the crashes that are caused by these short merges and weaving areas. We got the diversion to local roadways and how that's impacting kind of local communities. Transit currently is sitting in general purpose lanes, just like SOV single occupant vehicles, and caught up in those same backups as vehicles. We got limited active transportation facilities, and then the maintenance of the traffic during construction all need to be considered in our potential IBR solution. Next slide. So I'll stop here and see if there's any questions on what are ramp-to-ramp connections or auxiliary lanes.
I don't see any questions. Let's keep on moving.
All right, perfect. Let's go on. So auxiliary lanes for the IBR are proposed to address those close interchange spacing. As we've kind of shown you, most of them are about half mile. We've got the short merges, weaves, and diverges. An example of that is the Hayden Island on-ramp. It actually has about 150 feet of acceleration. Standard is 1,500 feet, so you get about 10%. What occurs there is that example where vehicles come on, have to make quick decisions. Lots of times vehicles stop on the ramp or stop on the freeway to allow that merging to occur, which leads to a lot of our collisions in the program area. We've got high on and off ramp volumes. I've shown you the SR500. Another example, that's Marine Drive, being about 1,400 to 1,800 vehicles per hour. We got the heavy vehicle crashes that kind of showed you. We got summarized by location as well. I kind of gave you a overall summary for the project area. We've also summarized them by location. So we have that information. And then the last one is we're trying to minimize the required number of lane shifts that are required for vehicles when they come on and they're getting off of the next ramp or a state route. So I want to identify that as well. Next slide. So how do we, so next I want to get into kind of the future volume predictions. We're using the travel demand model to kind of forecast the future patterns. The IBR program is using the demand model that's produced and developed and run by Metro and RTC for the 4-county region. The IBR program is using 2018 adopted regional transportation plan, including projects that were assumed to occur in 2045 as our basis of analysis. Those include such programs as the IBR, Rose Quarter, Division, BRT Transit, etc. So we're kind of, all those are inclusive in our future 2045 numbers. And then we run both a no build and a build scenario. So for the no build scenario, we end up taking out the IBR program. And then for the build scenario, it has the IBR program in there. So you can see the difference between those. So next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about tolling sensitivity analysis. So the purpose of the analysis was to test sensitivity of different toll rates on the cross river demand for both traffic and transit numbers, not to determine the toll rate or the toll structure. The team ran multiple scenarios as a with and without representation of the Oregon regional mobility pricing. So we're kind of looking at with and without that in combination. Some of the initial takeaways are that the tolls or toll rate on I-5, they reduce the volumes. So if you toll I-5, it reduces volumes on I-5 and diverts some of those trips to I-205. It reduces total trips across the river on I-5 and I-205. It increases transit demand and it impacts overall commute trips, home to work, work to home, very little in the peak periods. So what I'm talking about there is those trips that have to go from home to work or work to home still maintain and continue to occur. The majority of the impacts are to the discretionary trips or kind of trips during the off-peak period. So when we combine that with the regional mobility pricing project, it actually shows volumes coming back to I-5. I-5 is the corridor of choice. So when you're tolling, the Oregon mobility pricing assumes tolling of I-5 and I-205 and all of Oregon between the Columbia River and the Boone Bridge. So when you do that, it actually brings trips back to I-5 in the peak period. It reduces those discretionary trips and it allows more trips. Most of that's in the off-peak period where you're seeing those impacts. So that was the initial kind of tolling sensitivity testing. The other last thing I want to say real quick is the toll rates won't be set by the Transportation Commissions until the 2020 timeframe. So this was just kind of a sensitivity analysis looking at different rates and impacts on auto and transit numbers today.
Ryan, we do have a question before you move on. Commissioner Hardesty, raise your hand.
Thank you, Millicent. My question has to do with the initial takeaways, because since I-205 is going to be told first, I'm wondering how you came to the initial takeaways that initially we would reduce I-5 traffic. We know I-205 is actually going to be towed before I-5 will be towed. So I'm confused by that.
Yeah, sorry, I maybe didn't give enough of an introduction. So there was multiple scenarios. We ran I-5 tolling only scenarios. The Oregon Regional Mobility Pricing Project is kind of on its own time frame. So we needed to test scenarios that didn't include that and scenarios that did include that. So those initial takeaways, the tolls on I-5 only, those kind of top bullets are if you just toll I-5 at the bridge for the IBR program, what were the takeaways? And then we ran scenarios that included the regional mobility pricing. And if you told the I-5 bridge and I-5 and I-205 in Oregon as part of that program. So we did with and without scenarios. So there are scenarios that do not include that. So in those scenarios where you don't toll I-205 and I-5 South, those initial takeaways are for that.
Thank you.
So let's go on to the next slide. So here I wanted to walk through the scenarios that we were kind of going to go through the results on today and our initial thoughts on. So the no build I covered before, that was the kind of where the auxiliary lanes, ramp to ramp connections exist today. Wanted to show you kind of that's that scenario. We then have a one auxiliary scenario that has one aux lane across the river. You can see there in the middle. So north is to the right. This is our program area again. To kind of bridge, you add a lane, one auxiliary lane across the bridge. You then have the two auxiliary lane scenario on the bottom section where you see where you pick up the one aux lane, kind of fills in the gaps, and then the second aux lane comes on at Marine Drive and drops at Mill Plain, and then the reverse in the southbound. So those are the main differences. I'm going to go into the operations now and the results. So let's go to that, please. there's a lot on here. So I'm going to give us an orientation to the graphic, and then I'll get into what the data is, and then we can get to some conclusions after. So we've got these for a no build, a 1 aux, and a 2 auxiliary lane scenario. So on the top is the graphic. This is the no build. So this is the kind of base case. You can kind of see the map on the top. We then have kind of performance metrics, sort of for equity, climate. We have a travel time kind of metric there, kind of showing travel time results for different pairs. We then have daily mode share as well as PM 1 hour kind of mode share in brackets below that. I'll walk you through all this information here in a minute. We then have a congestion index, which is related to the heat maps on the right-hand side. So the heat maps, I'll go through those. So those are kind of showing the speeds that vehicles will be traveling through the kind of corridor area. So we've got AM southbound on the top is kind of the top bar. We have southbound PM is kind of the second row, if you imagine those being individual rows. We then have northbound 2 sections on the bottom, with northbound AM being the 3rd row and northbound PM being the bottom row. The darker red is slower speed. So the dark red is less than 20 miles an hour. The orange is 20 to 30. Yellow is 30 to 40. Light green is 40 to 50. Greater, kind of dark green is greater than 50. Imagine things like Google Maps. So kind of when they're giving you kind of the speed that you're going at the area. On the right-hand side is the I-5, I-205. On the left-hand side of that map is kind of downtown Portland. You can kind of see general locations highlighted on the graphic, I-84, I-405. You then get into our program area at Victory. The river's there in the middle. SR 500 is kind of the top of the project area. And then north of there goes up to I-205. The congestion index is related to this graphic. It is summarizing the amount of congestion, PM peak, peak direction, peak period, peak direction only. So that's summarizing that information. And then I want to give you real quick, the not applicable is applied to, because it's kind of current conditions. So, you know, that we don't have a cost for changing or a footprint impact. So the next 2 will show you kind of comparison of footprint differences, cost differences, climate and equity. But so I'll walk you through the results real quick. You can see kind of southbound AM. This is 2045 no builds. If you look at the heat map on the bottom right-hand side, you can see congestion at the bridge. And you can see congestion south of the bridge. This is that bottleneck I was talking to you about, I-5, I-405. So you kind of see where I-405 is at. That backs up. You've also got a bottleneck at the bridge. In the off-peak period, southbound PM, you also have congestion and no build backing up from downstream, as well as a bridge bottleneck at the bridge. So there's kind of 2 bottlenecks in the southbound timeframe. In the northbound, the bottom row there is kind of our northbound PM peak, our critical time period. As I pointed out, you got 7 hours of congestion today. This was showing you these are only 4-hour windows. We will have longer than that in the 2045 no build, and it backs up from the bridge all the way to downtown Portland in 2045 no build. These are again baseline conditions. You can see the congestion index. We've got about 28% dark red. So if you add up to that, you can see kind of how that's increasing out to 2045 timeframe. Compared to existing conditions. We don't have the heat map for existing conditions shown, but we have the same heat maps run, and that is summarized there in the congestion index. Other thing to note on here is the travel times. We picked 2 locations kind of for southbound AM. So from I-205, I-5 split at the north to I-405, as well as kind of a transit pair from 99th down to our kind of project southern limits. We've got kind of different travel time pairs. So goes from 29 minutes today in the southbound AM for that longer travel time out to 63 minutes. You can see a large increase in travel time out to 2045. Again, that's 2019 to 2045. And then the kind of look at the PM peak. You can see they're very similar between existing and no build, and it'll be backed up. This is PM peak, backs up all the way to downtown Portland like it does today, and would extend beyond those extents, and the duration would last longer. So that's one thing. The other thing I want to point out is the mode share down on the bottom left-hand quarter kind of shows you daily numbers. In the top number being about 80% vehicle, 7% transit, 12% truck, 1% active transportation. The number in brackets below is a PM 1 hour number. So you can see the 80% vehicle, but transit actually increases to 14% during the peak. freight goes down, kind of following those trends I showed you earlier, where freight tries to avoid the peak if they can. So the big difference between the PM peak and the daily is the transit increase. Again, that's kind of the home-based work-based home trips. Also, our existing service is kind of, we got the express bus routes that run during the peak period. So that is the kind of what you're seeing there. There are some changes to those plans. This is looking at 2045 no build. I will next go, sorry, let's see, there's a question.
Thank you. I'm so sorry to keep interrupting you, but in your modeling, are you assuming that human behavior will change at any time between now and 2045? And if so, how does that play out in your models?
Define human behavior. Sorry, I'm confused.
Well, I mean, today people are used to getting in an automobile to go wherever it is they need to go. I hope that's not where we are in 2045. I hope that human behavior has shifted a bit. And so my question is I know businesses will shift because they're going to do hybrid models rather than everybody being in the office. So I assume human behavior will shift as well. And I'm just curious as if you took that into account when you were developing the models.
So yes, so Metro and RTC are the ones who run the travel demand model, and they are predicting kind of, they look out to trends and behavior changes that you're getting at and try to, make conversions, electric vehicle conversions, those work from home, mode share conversions are included as well, and kind of assumptions, but those are, the same between the no build and the build. The build obviously has different transit assumptions or different IBR program assumptions, but the overall patterns that you're talking about are part of the travel demand process, and we use what is kind of provided by our partners to follow.
Does that satisfy?
It doesn't, but I'll move on.
Oh, thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. I see Secretary Millar's hand is raised.
Yeah, hi, thank you. And the commissioner raised a great question, and I just want to remind all of us that when we look at these models, the models are designed to inform decision-making. Too often, people think the models make the decisions. Models do not make the decisions. They inform decisions that people make, and there are simplifying assumptions in any model. Commissioner, about human behavior, for example. Most models are built around the economics, the cost of time. And so, those value judgments don't weigh in. And I think it's really important that we all acknowledge that models are valuable tools, but we need to have value-based decision that's informed by that data. Thank you.
Yeah, and Metro, I'll jump in real quick one more time. So Metro and RTC have kind of user surveys that they go out and collect, and they collect this information on how you'll make those choices, Commissioner Hardesty, of I need to go from this place, or how many trips do I take, and do I always take my vehicle? Can I take a transit? Can I take bike ped? So that information is fed into the model, and the model is calibrated, and then they kind of predict future kind of changes like you're getting at. So those are assumed in the model, that it's, it's not what was done last year or what was done 10 years ago. It's not those patterns must maintain out into the future. They do make adjustments, as you're kind of hinting at. So let's go to the next one. I know we're trying to race through a lot of information, and I'll get into some summaries. So I'll just kind of keep orienting us to this. And then we've got some large conclusions. I think you saw kind of in the PowerPoint slide deck that kind of roll these up, but I'll again orient us to the aux lane, one aux lane scenario here. Again, the map is on the top. Same measures are kind of highlighted. Equity is summarized, where you're increasing kind of modal options. You got climate kind of with some identifiers of change. You've got the daily mode share down there on the bottom, and kind of seeing the change kind of for the one auxiliary lane. You got travel times, again, that show existing. They now include both the no build and the one auxiliary lane scenario. You've got a congestion index that shows both the existing no build and one scenario. And then the heat maps over on the right-hand side are for the one auxiliary lane scenario. We have costs information compared to the base case, which is the two aux lane that was done because that's what was assumed in the regional transportation plan. So we kind of show a cost reduction for the one aux lane compared to that scenario, and then a footprint summary again compared to that two auxiliary lanes. Excuse me, I said one compared to the two auxiliary lane scenario for both cost and footprint. That is a kind of a reduction in 16 feet and then a reduction of $75 to $100 million. The congestion index kind of summarizes again the heat map. So the heat map, you can see not much change southbound AM. The downstream bottleneck kind of again impacts the bridge. The bridge bottleneck is kind of engulfed and hidden. And is it still there? Is it not there? It's tough to see. So there'll be some interim year improvements, but by 2045, you won't see much improvement compared to kind of the no build. The northbound AM, there's a slight improvement. Excuse me, northbound PM, northbound PM. There is a slight improvement compared to the no build condition, and I'll get into those kind of summary conclusions. Other thing to note is the mode share. You kind of see some of the mode share differences with the IBR program. So that this includes the high capacity transit, as well as express bus and bus on a shoulder. In those numbers, those percentages are slightly different. And I've got a comparison at the end that gets into all this. So I'll stop now, Millicent.
Yeah, Ryan, we have a question from Curtis Ravenhold.
Thank you, Millicent. Ryan, I love these slides. I'm a nerd, and these are really these are fantastic. Thanks for the sort of the visual representation. I have two, I guess, questions. I know you're going to get a little bit more to the where the bottleneck ends up will determine some of the behavior on the non-highway streets. As I think we've talked about before, I'm really concerned about how you get cars off of North and Northeast Portland streets and back onto the highway when you're north of the Rose Quarter. But I know you get to that in a few slides. I'm intrigued by this one and the next one on two aux lanes, the asymmetry in the north and south, and if there was any consideration given to two aux lanes in one direction and one in another. If two aux lanes don't affect southbound because the bottleneck is actually further south than the IBR, would it make sense to consider two aux lanes going north and one going south, where you resolve, as you see on this one aux lane slide, you resolve at least half of you resolve the sort of the bridge connected congestion? I just wonder about that asymmetry, if that's been given any consideration, or if one assumes that you have to do it for whatever reasons, engineering or political reasons or whatever, it's got to be the same in both directions.
Those are great questions. I will lean on Frank and Ray to jump in and help me with that one, but I want to get back to your first one about the kind of impacts to local streets. And that is a good point. I did want to point out, so these kind of are just showing the freeway main lines. There will be backups at the interchanges with these conditions, and we don't have that completely summarized to date, but that'll be information that'll be summarized in the impact analysis, NEPA analysis, getting into that information. But that's a good question about kind of the asymmetry question. So I might let Frank and Ray, I know we've considered it and I've been thinking about it. The other thing we need to understand here is kind of maintenance of traffic during construction. So how to maintain operations during construction. So that's an important fact that's kind of not on these summary sheets, but we will discuss that for sure.
Yeah, and I'll jump in real quick, Ryan. I think you just summarized it very well. That's what I was going to say, is that we, as we started seeing some of this data, that is absolutely a question that I think, we started thinking about, does it need to be symmetric, or can you look at maybe the benefits of different aux lanes in each direction? I think we need to look at that throughout the corridor. As Ryan said, there aren't the same amount of aux lanes everywhere. So as we're looking at the volumes and as we're moving forward, that's definitely something that we're open to studying. So thank you for that question.
We have two more questions.
That added a few more questions, yes.
Sorry. Secretary Millar, and then CAG co-chair Lynn Valenter.
Yeah, when we have this conversation about aux lanes, I don't think it really ought to be about congestion as much as safety. The video that we saw earlier and all the discussion leading up to this was about aux lanes reduce crashes. It's rather apparent looking at the congestion index that aux lanes don't do a heck of a lot for congestion. So does it reduce crashes there at the bridge? I don't know if you want me to answer. I mean,
I don't know.
Well,
I feel like
if you have the answer, yeah, I just
I don't have the answer yet. I think there'll be, so the northbound. I mean, that's a very good point. And that is, they're more than just congestion. They are safety related. I think it will be an improvement over today. As I pointed out, the Hayden Island, there's no shoulders in lots of locations. So there will be improvements in safety. Is there a lot of improvement in safety? I don't think there's a lot between the one ox and the no build. We're looking into trying to how to analyze that and kind of calculate that information to support this data. But the 2 ox lane kind of brings down, those congestion related collisions will come down more with the 2 ox than they will with the 1 ox for sure.
Yeah, because the congestion, it's apparent when you look southbound. We can do all kinds of things here at the bridge, but the system that we've put in place and the policy decisions that we've made, that it's 3 through lanes in each direction through Portland and north of the river as well. That basic framework means there's going to be peak hour congestion. So, going from 2 down to 1 saved us $100 million. I need to see safety data, because that was what we were selling ox lanes on before. So anyway, that'll be more important to me than saving 2 minutes 25 years from now, which is really decimal dust when you think about modeling and all of the uncertainties in modeling. Thanks.
So
Thank you.
I'm just going to jump right in the interest of time. My question is about the existing ox lanes that disappeared, I think, from the ox lanes shown. Well, anyway, I think it's around the Interstate Avenue Victory Boulevard where they're existing, or maybe Marine Drive. Anyway, there's some ox lanes that went away. Can you address that?
Yeah, so the design, so we're trying to help these stick diagrams. Sorry, I'll try to slow down. These stick diagrams show you general main line and ramp on and off ramps. There are parallel roads and collector distributors that kind of take care of some of those movements. So what's occurring there in the Hayden Island Marine Drive is there was an ox lane today because the interchange spacing is half a mile or less. We have ended up braiding these in this case because of the Hayden Island Marine Drive, kind of some of the interchange options that have been looked at there with the half interchange or partial interchange, versus the full interchange. So up on the top there on the graphic, you can see the ramp that says comes on from Marine Drive and Hayden Island. So it's really braided in this case. So instead of having that auxiliary lane on the main line, you've got a braided ramp that's taken that account. So it has removed auxiliary lanes from the main line in this section, but those are occurring on kind of a braided system instead. So these graphics are general in nature to help us try to get to a point quickly, but they miss out on that fact that you're pointing out there. So.
No, that's terrific. My concern was that we were like squeezing the snake. And so because we were clearing traffic here, there wasn't any benefit in having better safety or throughput. But your answer is great. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Hardesty, and then President Peterson.
I'm going to be quick because I know I've asked a lot of questions. I find it interesting that we will get better results with 1 ox lane on SR 500 and I-205 to 405, that we get better results like almost doing nothing. And then we get even better results just doing the 1 ox lane. I find that interesting. I don't know how we can model for 2045 without taking into account climate and BIPOC communities and how they're going to be impacted by this. So I'm still concerned that if we're not talking about reducing greenhouse gases at the same time we're talking about moving freight and automobiles, then we are losing the opportunity to build a system for 2045. The increase, the question is, do we want to increase capacity? And I say no. I say we want to decrease capacity on I-5, and we want to make sure that we're using it the most equitable and climate-friendly manner. And so my question becomes, what does equity mean in this whole scenario? How are you centering the communities that are going to be most impacted by this and by what we do.
So real quick, I maybe went over too fast. The little dials there under the data summary. So we do have an equity index kind of showing, increased modal options kind of as a general assumption, and then there are kind of a general conclusion. And then we have the climate kind of there. I know they're super small in this graphic. Anticipated GHG reduction, mode shift away from SOV, variable rate tolling. All of those are kind of climate centric metrics that are inclusive of the overall IBR program. And then I was caught up. I'm not following your first statement there, Commissioner Hardesty, about the travel time benefits.
Oh, see, if you look at the bottom of your travel time benefits, PM peak northbound.
Yeah.
It just surprised me that there wasn't a big difference in the no build and 1XO for AM peak, but there seems to be a difference in the PM northbound.
I think it's reversed. So the PM, so the existing, sorry, I want to try to explain. So the 35 minutes, so let's just say Broadway to SR 500 is 35 minutes existing. It's 35 minutes in no build, and then it goes down to 24 with the one aux. So you do get some improvement northbound PM with the one auxiliary over existing no build. The problem with existing and no build is you back up all the way to downtown Portland. And it's the same case in existing and no build. You kind of, you need to extend your model. You need to have further distance to kind of capture that entire difference, because there is change. It's outside of the limits. We're already 7 miles, we've got a 20-mile operational model summarizing it. So you have to extend this, down south to I-5, I-205 to kind of capture maybe some of those differences. But in the southbound AM, there is a difference between existing and no build. You can see the big, large increase. Those are the top ones. So these are peak period, peak direction. So southbound AM's on the top two, and then PM peak northbound is on the bottom two.
One last question, I'll turn it over to Chair Peterson. The daily mode share almost didn't move at all when it came to mass transit. And I think, I believe that will change significantly when people have more options for how they get around. And it appears that it moved, 2 percentage points or 1 percentage point from the last slide that you showed.
Yeah, again, I'm sorry, these, can somebody help us zoom in? There's a footnote on the bottom of this that is very difficult to read.
Yeah.
As pointed out, so I was hoping all of us could, zoom in on our own. So yeah, if you can, I don't know if we can zoom in. So transit demand is over capacity in these. We're providing so much demand that it's more than what can be served. So there's a little footnote there on the bottom that this is talking about just the amount that can be served. So the other thing to note is the no build is an increase over today's transit. So CTran, TriMet are doing a lot of improvements that are planned out to 2045 no build. So you get to take advantage of that as well. And then both of these cases, you're trying to shift more, but there's already too much demand over service. So we've capped these at service. So the service is similar, but there is a difference. And I think if you look at the peak kind of number in the brackets below, there's a little bit more of a difference, but agree with you. There is a small shift between the amount that you can serve between the scenarios.
Thanks, Ryan. President Peterson.
Thanks, and apologies for not being on video. I guess my question, this is really good information. First of all, thank you. I think we've been all waiting for this data and a conversation at this level, so thank you. My question is a combination of sensitivity analysis, traffic operations, and tolling. So as we look at the number of aux lanes, because that's really all we're looking at now, we're not looking at the combinations, which we'll talk about later. But when we look at the sensitivity of traffic operations with and without tolls, or the entirety of an Oregon mobility pricing program, and the fact that each additional aux lane is not equivalent, right? So when you add one aux lane, you get a big benefit. When you add the next one, you don't get the same incremental benefit. It is a declining benefit. So when we combine that with tolling, what is the sensitivity on that second aux lane? What is our confidence that it actually has the benefit that we believe it to have? Does that make sense?
It does. I'm going to push you just a little bit. I don't know if they're equal. I think if you were talking like through lanes, I would think each through lane would be considered equal, and you kind of go down to like the disproportional benefit.
I'm not talking through lanes. I'm talking aux lanes. That's what we're talking about right now is aux lanes. And the question is the sensitivity of how the tolling affects the need for each additional aux lane.
Maybe we go to the next slide, and then I kind of show you the difference between the two lanes. We haven't got to the two lane yet, and show you the differences in the heat maps and the congestion. Then we can come back to the tolling question. Is that okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, let's do that, and then we'll try to come back and answer your question. So wanted to get through this. I know we're running behind Millicent. So this
You're good. You're good.
Okay, so this is the two auxiliary lane scenario. You can see kind of, again, the plot on the top kind of shows you where those lanes are added, where they drop at. We've got the same kind of metrics on the bottom. You got the travel time benefits, you got the daily mode share. The daily mode share is similar between these two scenarios, between the one aux and the two aux, as I kind of discussed, we're capped out at service. So you get the same general mode share, both daily and peak. Travel time benefits, you can kind of see the change and improvement with the two aux compared to the no build, which we'll go back to and bounce between. I think we might just skip the bullets and let you guys read the bullets and go to the overall summary in a minute. But if you look at the heat map on the bottom right-hand corner, the northbound PM peak has a large difference between what you saw on the last one auxiliary lane scenario. Though southbound AM, the top row, pretty similar, slightly less congestion, but pretty similar kind of case with the downstream bottleneck backing up to the north. But the northbound PM, you get large improvements in congestion, and you kind of see that in the congestion index there in the middle. And then the travel times, if you go over to the travel time kind of summary bullets, that's where you see your main kind of travel time savings in the PM peak, and then also a small little difference in the AM peak kind of time frame. So now to try to get to your question, President Peterson, so can you restate it for me one more time, and maybe I can attempt it again?
So what we know from traffic operations, traffic engineering, is that each additional aux lane has less and less benefit. And that's because of the merge weave that occurs, right? The more merging and weaving that you have happening in that distance, the less actual throughput you're going to get. And so the more chaos actually you're introducing into the system, to put it another way. So I guess my question is, with or without tolling, have you done the sensitivity analysis to find out whether the additional benefit is actually needed from a second aux lane or not, based on the tolling impact to the traffic operations?
So the tolling sensitivity stuff, as we mentioned, I went through the highlights earlier. So we've tested different scenarios of higher toll rates, those same two toll scenarios, plus the regional mobility pricing or Oregon congestion pricing kind of program included. And there were those kind of main trade-offs that, sometimes you reduce volume on I-5, sometimes you actually increase volume on I-5, and it kind of gives you that sensitivity you're getting at, President Peterson, about the volumes going up and down. The other component to consider is the transit portion and the kind of the forecast for transit and the amount that can be served and demand. So there is kind of sensitivity. The aux lanes, as Secretary Millar kind of got at, are really trying to help you with the safety of the short interchange spacing and heavy on and off ramps. And a lot of the volume, as I kind of showed with the origin destinations, get on and off kind of at ramps. So there's not a lot of through. So I don't know if I call it chaos, but there's, people who get on and they drive through the aux lane and get off at their next state route. That's their ultimate goal. So all of that hopefully gets to answer your question.
No, I mean, comparatively, I understand where we are in this study. And I guess as we move through, I'm going to want to see the traffic operations impacts, not just the planning level overview. I think that's going to be really important to zero in on what we need and what we don't need for the future, and what the benefits and trade-offs are. So while I appreciate it, and I know where we are in the study, I think we're going to need a little bit more information to be able to make those trade-offs.
Thank you, President Peterson.
Let's go to the
Noted, Ryan.
next. Yep, yeah, let's go to the next ones. We'll note that. Let's go to the next ones. I'll try to go through these quickly. These are kind of the main conclusions. So from either one auxiliary lane or a two auxiliary lane trade-offs compared to no build. So you get the modal choice benefits of high capacity transit, bus on shoulder, and active transportation. You get the variable rate tolling. You reduce the overall congestion. You get off-peak benefits, including weekends. There's less diversion to local streets. You get faster congestion recovery from crashes and incidents. There's fewer lane changes required. And then you get the safety benefits of full lane widths to kind of current vehicle widths, turning and comfort standards. You get fewer sideswipe crashes. You actually have full shoulders, so to allow the bus on shoulder and recovery from breakdowns, improve visibility, and no bridge lifts kind of are some of the major safety improvements. That's in any one or two compared to a no build. Next slide. So benefits of one auxiliary compared to the no build. So you get some travel time benefits as kind of highlighted on the previous graphic. You reduce congestion, congestion is similar, but there's some reduction in the off-peak periods with the one aux compared to the no build. You get the safety benefits, as we kind of just discussed. You get the modal shift. You can see the increase between the no build and the kind of the mode shift projections with the project. You get the climate impacts and improvements of the anticipated GHG reduction, and then increased modal options for equity. Stop. Looks like there's a question, Millicent.
President Peterson? Is that leftover from before?
Yes, it is. Apologies.
No worries. I understand you're in transit. Commissioner Hardesty.
I just want to say that equity is more than increasing modal options. Equity is also about ensuring we're not exacerbating costs for low-income community members. So your equity definition should be expanded.
I will work with the equity team to make sure we get some additional information in here as you're kind of highlighting. Those are good points. So thank you. Let's go to the next slide. And then here is the benefits of the two auxiliary lane compared to the no builds. You get, again, the travel time improvements. You get a little bit more in the southbound AM. It's pretty similar to the two lane or one lane, but the big difference is the northbound PM kind of travel time benefits. The reduction in congestion also kind of highlighted here. You get those safety benefits. The mode shift is similar to the one aux, but again, it's an improvement over no build. You get the climate, and then equity again will expand on increased modal option, improved travel time reliability, and look for other kind of information to add to this. So I think my last slide, hopefully, is the overall comparison. So I was trying to get to this, but maybe we should have moved this up in order. So this shows kind of the main trade-offs of those last kind of placemats for the no build, the one aux, and the two aux. So on the top, we've got the heat maps. You can kind of go across and see kind of the differences. So the top row again is southbound AM. You then have southbound PM. So you can see the southbound PM benefits of the one aux or the two aux compared to the no build. You then have the third row kind of across the heat map. There is northbound AM, and then the northbound PM is the fourth row. And that's where you kind of see the differential and differentiator between the two aux and the one aux kind of main pieces. Travel time down the bottom right corner summarizes those travel time for those same segments, kind of two segments southbound AM, two segments northbound PM. You can see the one aux change northbound PM, you get 10 minutes kind of increase and improvement in travel time versus the two aux, you knock down about 25 minutes kind of improvement. Mode share, we got the no build there, and then you got the one aux versus two aux. Mode share daily versus PM 1 hour kind of summary. You see that improvement kind of in the transit, about 4% on a daily basis, about 3% in the PM peak. And then we got the congestion index on the bottom left-hand side, kind of summarizing the heat maps. So I will stop there and see if there are questions.
Do we have any additional questions? I know that it was a lot of information. I see Matt Ransom's hand is raised. Matt?
Yeah, thank you. First off, to the group and those watching, I mean, Ryan, I know what you're doing. I trust what the team is doing. I'm very familiar with our piece of it at the RTC side and Metro's piece and the forecasting. But I think, as Secretary Millar pointed out, these are all tools. The forecasts are very prescribed methodologies to estimate the future, but it's not an absolute prediction of the future. They're all relative to each other. And I think it's important that we keep that in mind, also those that are watching and have an interest in this topic. So I think what you presented in that the last slide, the one that puts them all together, is an amazing illustration of the trade-off. Certainly the 2-aux lane uncorks that northbound traffic in a very profound way, but that's only for that sort of element of this discussion, which is traffic performance and the associated components. I tend to agree with what Secretary Millar said, which is if there's a fundamental public purpose here, and that's to increase safety and promote safety on the system, certainly the highway system being a very risky asset. People drive fast, have high speed maneuvers. And so when it comes down to, sort of in my observation, the trade-offs, right? So that most recent slide is all about the trade-offs. What do you get for this? What do you get for that? And when we look at the purpose and need criteria, when we look at the other sort of qualitative trade-offs that we're all going to make, a couple of things come to mind for me. So those quick observations are, we can't solve all the problems. When you build and rebuild infrastructure within a built urban environment, the question is, how much can you improve? So I think the aspiration that certainly I think members of the RTC would have would be, can we improve things? So that's, we ought to be improving things, safety, mobility, et cetera. If we're not improving things, then I think there's a question in terms of the overall purpose. So can we improve things? And then I think I go to our growth management plans. I know on the Washington side, our growth management plan is built on the premise that in the future, we want to have a prosperous economy. We want to have movements of people and goods, social, et cetera, to have a vibrant region. And so building this infrastructure, replacing it within a built urban environment, I then turn to what are the unique attributes within this corridor segment. And the top of mind for me that I think are obvious physically are, we have 2 international ports. And so when we dovetail the economy, it's inextricably linked to these port facilities for trade sector employment, bringing money, effectively trade sector jobs into the region. And those are, you can't move those. So we ought to be maybe in a value trade-off exercise. Can we be optimizing the outcomes for the port facilities, knowing that as a bedrock of our economy, trade sector employment and those unique assets are just, irreplaceable. So we need to optimize there. We have a central business district in downtown Vancouver. We have a historic reserve, which is the settlement area for the Oregon country, et cetera. Native peoples have traded there for, hundreds and hundreds of years. We ought to be recognizing the value of those places. So you've set a great table. I appreciate the analysis. Now the difficult work begins for all of us, which is how do we trade off and how do we optimize those things that are the most important, knowing that it's not going to solve everything. It never could, it never will. And I think the community partners that are looking at this, I think they would acknowledge that, but it's important that we talk in those terms. Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Director Ransom. Secretary Millar?
Yeah, thank you. I think the modeling tool gives us a data point that we can use in our decision making. Something I know about models almost without exception is they wind up being wrong, particularly the further out you go in time. And so this model, or at least this discussion about this model, is looking at today and 25 years from now. And it's important to realize that limit to the model. And what I would like to see as we move forward in the NEPA process is, what does the model say about 5 years after construction? what does the model say about 10 years after? Because those increments, the closer you are to the present day, the more certain we can be about what's there. You know, I see that bright, shiny object of northbound congestion in 2045 if you do a second aux lane. And I go, yeah, right. Every time we provide that kind of capacity, it gets filled. Every time it gets filled. So what I'd like to see, I think, you know, we have the data we need to inform the conversation we need to have. But one of the things I'll want to see, and maybe some of my colleagues on the executive steering group will want to see as we move forward in NEPA, is what's the model say about the year after construction, 5 years after construction, as opposed to what's the model say when I'm 105. You know, I'd like to see that, and I'd like to just remind my colleagues that we can ask for that as we get into the NEPA analysis, and I hope we do. Thanks.
Thank you, Secretary Millar. Commissioner Hardesty, and I am going to ask that this be the last question on this topic.
I want to appreciate Secretary Millard's last statement. I think we need a lot of information about how things will happen during construction, because things will change radically, right? And as well as making sure that as we move forward with this process, that we're really thinking about how adding a cost where people are used to doing things for free, how that significantly changes behavior. And so I don't know that we've actually done that kind of cost analysis, because what we know is that if people now have to pay, say, $5 to cross the bridge, I suspect there would be a lot less people crossing the bridge. And if this is really about improving transit access for people and for goods, changing behavior should be a part of the projections that are taking place. So I'll just leave it there. And I will say again, this is about the economic engine of Oregon, but it's also about the people of Oregon and Washington. It's not just a freeway. We will impact people's lives for a generation to come. And so it's really important that we get this right. I know we're rushing to the NEPA process, and I hope we have some really clear answers as we move through that process. Because again, I'm hearing now that NEPA will be the solution, but it's what we feed in that matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty.
And I just will say I may have to leave in a couple of minutes. So if I leave, it's not anything anybody said. I just have to get going. Thank you.
Thank you for reminding us of that and for informing us that we've not created any opportunities or need for you to step away. So if there are no other questions, Ryan, do you have any closing comments? And if not, we will just move on into our next presentation. I know I programmed a break. Thanks, Ryan. You and your team have done a yeoman's work in pulling this information and working with the team to provide the comprehensive information that you have. So much appreciated and pleased that we'll be able to continue in this conversation. So I did program in a 10-minute break, but I recognize, based on the fact that we're trying to run through the agenda, that everyone on this call is able to do what you need to do for yourselves without being given permission to do so. So I'm going to ask that we move on into the next presentation. It is a technical overview and data sharing presentation on transit. We started the conversation last week and we're going to finish it this week, or at least we'll get to part 2 this week. And John Willis, our project manager, is going to lead the conversation. So John, take it away.
Thank you, Millicent.
I'm sorry, John, before you start, if we are able to get through his whole presentation without stopping for questions and then hold questions till the end, he can get through the whole presentation pretty quickly. So let's work together to try to achieve that goal. Thank you.
Thanks, but I look forward to getting any questions on this. We, given that we're short on time, trying to figure out how to go through this. Knowing that you all have this in your packet, I'm going to go over reasonably quick the information, including the stuff that we've shared briefly before. So I'm also joined today by Sean Donaghy, and CEO for C-Tran, and Sam Dessou, TriMet's General Manager. We're going to really share more about what the program has done, but want to open that up for Sean and for Sam to chime in if you feel needed. So let me go to the next slide. We're going to provide a quick recap of the process to date. This is the part I will go over at a pretty high level, including how we developed the investments, looking at the measures, and of course, responding to what's changed since 2013. I will also do the draft findings from our transit measures at a very high clip. We'll take a deeper dive and go a little slower on the considerations for our transit components, including a review of trade-offs and performance applied to the investments that we're looking at, and next steps, how we take this information and what it means for the draft program recommendation. So let's go ahead and move forward. As you know, a lot has changed since 2013 with mostly related to the C-Tran Vine network, including a Vine that's under operation, one that has just started construction, one that's in the planning phase. So that combined with the work the City of Vancouver has done with C-Tran has really created a great system and great station environments, and especially in the Central Business District for the street network of Broadway and Washington. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about alignment. We've also seen the substantial growth in the waterfront district, City of Vancouver, and we've also talked about the population growth in Clark County since 2010, including the diversity of that population growth. Let's go to the next slide. In getting to where we are today, we looked at 10 representative transit investments. We developed 16 measures. Those were developed with our project partners over a multi-month period that looked at things such as ridership, access for equity priority communities, our relative costs between investment options, and the potential impacts. We got a lot of stakeholder and community engagement, both through our advisory groups as well as from the general community. The project components also, and I'll mention this at least 2 or 3 more times in this presentation, will continue to be optimized and refined as design advances. So let's move on. So the draft findings, again, we shared some of this a meeting and 2 meetings ago, but I want to re-emphasize all of these, and it really lines up with the work that Ryan just shared as far as modeling goes. We are modeling to 2045 and trying our best to predict the future. But as Secretary Millar said, these models provide guidance to support decision-making. All build options that we looked at substantially improved service over the no build. We also show strong demand for cross-river transit service, and we expect that to increase. The capacity that we're looking at both the investment level and at the system level are important considerations. So we have to look at the systems, both TriMet's light rail system as well as C-Tran's bus rapid transit system, not just the stations and the system itself, but other elements such as operations and maintenance facilities and pinch points in those systems and where those can be alleviated to understand what the true capacity is as we move into the future. Transit investments that serve identified markets and attempt to serve demand will need to include really all modes. So when you see us talking about a mode decision, think about the big decision we're making across the river, but also, and I'll describe this more in a few slides, our investment options are really looking at a combination of services, both leaning on the strengths of TriMet and leaning on the strengths of C-Tran to build a really cohesive system. One thing I mentioned a couple meetings ago, that the transfers from other transit vehicles are the highest mode of access for all representative transit investments. That's just a nod to both of our transit partners in their ability to create systems that we can model showing connection. That's a pretty big deal. And also we've draft finding, we've noticed that light rail options have higher ridership and carrying capacity than BRT options on the whole when comparing similar alignments. Let's go to the next page. And if there's any questions, Millicent, I know you said to wait, but I'm going through this really fast. We also showed modeling shows park and ride demand. I know park and rides are a big topic, but the demand is highest when you locate those facilities to provide convenient access to I-5 and the travel shed that I-5 creates. Options that include more stations serve more residents within walking distance, including Black, Indigenous, and people of color and low-income populations. So more stations create more performance. Also, transit investments, all of them that we looked at include improved access to jobs, including BIPOC and low-income populations. And light rail transit investments improve access to jobs to a greater degree than BRT. And also, when comparing the same representative alignments, the light rails options have a higher capital cost and lower operating cost per rider than BRT options. Let's go on to the next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so here are the considerations we looked at for the representative transit investments. So this is really the work we're doing to understand how we look at the components, the three components, including the alignment, the mode, and what the IBR program terminus is. Other components that'll be studied later include the general station locations, how we handle those riders that access via vehicle by park and ride. I mentioned operations and maintenance facilities earlier, and system improvements to transit speed and reliability. So these will be studied further, but today we're going to focus on those top three components. Let's go ahead and jump into alignment, or excuse me, mode. We'll start by looking at the modes that were considered for program investment. Bus on shoulder, looking at C-Tran's current express bus routes and how they can operate through the program area. Bus rapid transit and light rail transit. And I want to point out here that bus on shoulder was considered as a standalone mode in that top bullet there, but was also considered additive to the two other options as we modeled and looked into the future. Let's go to the next slide. So bus on shoulder is a transit investment that serves the identified markets and attempts to serve demand. It would need to include a combination of bus rapid transit and light rail transit and express bus. So to serve that, we need to include more than bus on shoulder. The bus on shoulder capability is included in all representative investments. Since it's in the other ones I'm about to talk about, we've removed it as a standalone option for consideration for a transit investment. Let's move on. Bus rapid transit and light rail transit, and how do they compare? Again, for that component for the cross river connection. When comparing the same representative alignments, light rail does have a higher demand than bus rapid transit. You can see the difference in vehicle capacity between both. The other thing to consider that changes the demand that we're modeling is an additional transfers needed for bus rapid transit when traveling further north or south than Expo. That creates travel time. And as was mentioned, the models do take a look at time and economics. And so those are how we're using to predict that, and that transfer impacts that. So it affects demand for bus rapid transit options more when compared to the C-Tran express bus option between downtown Vancouver and downtown Portland. All right, I'm going really fast here. And the average weekday ridership mode in 2008, excuse me, we noted that LRT had a 19 to 25% more riders than BRT. That delta has increased in our modeling. And the reason for that is the BRT options include an additional transfer for riders that are traveling further north-south than Expo, as I mentioned, which creates a stronger demand for light rail. Also, bus rapid transit options are seeing more trips moving to the C-Tran express bus service. Again, shifting some of that compared to what we looked at back in 2008. Let's go to the next slide. So the real takeaways here on mode, again, across the river, light rail allows the option to maximize trips across the river. It allows for preservation of the C-Tran Vine and Express bus current and future system while providing convenient connections to new LRT stations. And light rail provides more competitive travel time compared with trips that require a transfer at Expo Center. And the competitiveness for FTA discretionary fund will be higher with light rail than it is with bus rapid transit. Excuse me. A light rail extension of the MAX yellow line from Expo Center into Vancouver best integrates into the transit investment for the region. Next slide. So just a summary, as we look at those building blocks of mode, alignment, and the IBR terminus, the preferred transit investment that our partners and the program are looking at is light rail transit. Again, after that investment is selected, our project components will be optimized and refined as design advances and benefits and impacts are better understood. Let's go to alignment. Again, I'm assuming, Melissa, I don't see any hands, so there's no questions. Okay, we'll discuss alignment. I did mention the work that C-Tran and the City of Vancouver have done. That will be something we can talk about here. So you can see on this graphic here, we have all the representative investments shown, and they really shift or they really show up in two major alignments. One that runs through the central business district on Washington and Evergreen couplet. Traffic nerds like to talk about couplets as two one-way streets. That includes the Expo to Turtle Place, which took us across the river into Turtle Place. You can see that on the graphic, as well as that's in yellow, as well as the green 2013 LPA, which ran all the way up to roughly McLaughlin and terminated near Clark College. The options that are I-5 running adjacent, we like to say I-5 hugging, include the blue line that takes you all the way to Expo. Again, looking at all of our investment options, the Expo to I-5 McLaughlin and the Expo to Evergreen. Those two are shown along that purple line. It's pretty hard to see as all the alignments are right on top of each other. So those are the two big areas we're looking at as far as where this alignment can run when considering investments. So let's go to the next slide. So the real takeaways is that any transit investment should be made with a desire to complement the C-Tran Vine system, including the existing and planned service. I mentioned one BRT line is in operation, fourth lane, one just started under construction, Mill Plain, and we have one in planning, the Highway 99 alignment. The Vine and C-Tran Express bus service provide frequent and reliable service within Clark County and to downtown Portland, respectively. And the City of Vancouver has worked with C-Tran to really create robust station environments for the Vine system in the central business district. Let's go to the next slide. The other thing we want to do as a program is support Vancouver's land use and development goals. Significant investment in downtown Vancouver has occurred since the 2013 LPA, including the stations, the aforementioned stations, as well as the work along the Washington Broadway couplet and the frequency of those routes. I think we can say the addition of light rail infrastructure would duplicate that service and have pretty significant impacts. The I-5 alignment has fewer potential property impacts than the 2013 LPA alignment and integrates with transit-oriented development. There are opportunities at Library Square, which is where Evergreen is, and the nearby city-owned parcels. In addition, a connection over I-5 between Library Square and the Historic Reserve has potential to create a significant opportunity to integrate transit into an active station environment that connects to key destinations. Let's go to the next slide. So we put a big red circle on to emphasize that of the two main alignments, one that runs through the central business district and one that runs along I-5, I-5 has created the best investment opportunity. And so we, as we go to the next slide, as we start looking at these building blocks, we're looking at the mode across the river, light rail transit, the alignment, I-5 running adjacent, and looking at a terminus will be next. Again, please be reminded, we'll continue to refine these components as design advances and benefits and impacts are better understood. So let's talk terminus. Need a drink of water. The terminus is really, the IBR terminus has fewer potential impacts if you go to Evergreen than connecting further north. Is again mentioning the connectivity of Evergreen with the jobs, services, and amenities it provides, as well as transit-oriented development opportunities. Evergreen terminus maximizes transfer opportunities given the direct connections to several local routes, as well as planned bus rapid transit routes. So there's a lot of connectivity there. Evergreen also connects over I-5 to the Historic Reserve and west through downtown to Main Street and Esther Short Park via the planned 9th Street pedestrian way. So a lot of ways to access at Evergreen. Let's go to the next slide. So the preferred transit investment looks at light rail, I-5 adjacent, and IBR terminus near Evergreen. As we go into the NEPA, we will be able to look at impacts and opportunities and understand how we can optimize and refine that design, looking at both access and connectivity with existing services, both north and south of the river. So let's go to next steps. This preferred transit investment that we just laid out for you will eventually be rolled into a modified locally preferred alternative. So this is a little bit of a sneak preview, if you will, for the modified locally preferred alternative we will be presenting at the May 5th ESG. We are looking to optimize, as I've mentioned, the preferred transit investment. That includes access, operations, and fundability. And you can see there what we mean by each of those three. So with that, I will pause and see if we have any questions related to transit investment. And thank you for allowing me to go fast. I appreciate that.
Thank you, John. I'm canvassing. I don't see any hands raised.
I would be remiss if I didn't let our very important partners of both of our transit agencies, CTRAN and TriMet, if they wanted to have a moment to speak.
Perfect. CEO Donahue?
Yeah, I would just, first I would just say, we've worked very diligently at CTRAN to improve the future of transportation in Southwest Washington, really specifically after the stoppage of the CRC project nearly a decade ago. Our 2030 plan has focused energy on providing frequent, equitable transportation for all members of our community. And it really started with our work on Fourth Plane BRT, and you're seeing that now in our construction of Mill Plane and really our future plans for BRT along Highway 99. And an extension of our original line on Fourth Plane. In that time, we've also introduced the Current, which is a microtransit service that's changed the way we're able to, for our customers to access their own communities or connect to the larger CTRAN network. And all of this to ensure that our communities have the ability to make choices that are really specific to their travel needs. I would say that the IBR project has really provided us a unique opportunity to better connect our transit networks between CTRAN and TriMet, really to provide that critical piece to our growing platform. And I'm always thankful for my friend and colleague, Sam Dessou, the GM at TriMet, and our partners at TriMet, especially Steve, Jamie, and Jeb. There's been a lot of good work. I'll be very honest, we've had several meetings with extremely forward discussion about recognition of things that have changed for both transit systems over the past 10 years, and really thinking about how we want to incorporate those things into this current iteration of the project. Now, when you think about the growth of the city of Vancouver and really Clark County at large, there was a need for CTRAN's network to shift. And I think that was paramount in our understanding of why the conditions of the CRC's original locally preferred alternative are really no longer a viable option for CTRAN or TriMet or really our residents and the rest of our community as a function of that growth. It's one of the many reasons that CTRAN has supported the I-5 running scenario. We think that's the best option in terms of the project as a whole. After much review of all the associated options, we also believe that Evergreen provides the greatest opportunity to connect our modes, which what we have in CTRAN's network with TriMet's light rail system, while really the goal there being to minimize displacement or avoiding disruption of an already vibrant city streetscape in downtown Vancouver, and providing continued access and equity through CTRAN's current and future network. Our partners at the City of Vancouver also believe that this connectivity point will serve demand, really future development, and help with climate and equity goals as well. I do think it's important to note that CTRAN's agreement includes sustaining that which has been mutually successful for both Southwest Washington and Portland in our direct express bus service, as well as our extensive bus rapid transit framework. The mode selection, as you kind of see, may be specific to the IBR project in terms of light rail. And the reality of that is because CTRAN will already have finalized and constructed our 2030 vision for our BRT network, we will be waiting for our partners to connect the system at Evergreen when we feel that the time is applicable. And again, I just want to say thanks to our partners, as well as members of the community groups who have provided feedback to the IBR team during the process. And I'm not sure if Sam's on. I thought I saw Steve, so I would turn it over to Sam or Steve, whoever wants to go next.
The general manager had to step away, so Steve Witter has joined, and he does have something he'd like to share.
Great, thank you. And Sean, thank you for the compliment. It's been a pleasure to work with you and Monica and Scott and Randy and your whole team over at CTRAN. It's just been a terrific collaborative endeavor, I would say. Sam Dessou did have to whisk away. He got an invitation to a party he could not refuse this afternoon. So, but he did give me some prepared comments that I will read as they're his. As Sean said, we've been having a lot of, pretty significant conversations about what's changed, what's new, what's ahead of us. And those same conversations have been happening with Sam and our internal team as well. So I'll read his comments. First, I'd like to show my appreciation to the leadership around the virtual table through all your efforts and deliberations. We find ourselves today moving forward, which is exciting. Our staff on this project at all levels have worked hard, and I am incredibly appreciative of that. Special thanks to the IBR team and its thorough analysis of high capacity transit, including extensive technical work and robust community engagement. I also want to call out our close partner throughout all of this, C-Tran. Our partnership has enabled us to explore the best ways to link our transit systems, and both agencies share the goal of providing safe, easy, and reliable quick trips for our customers across the river. We are supportive of the light rail recommendation to Evergreen via I-5 for a number of reasons. Modeling shows that there's high transit demand, and light rail has the capacity to move more people more efficiently and will require customers to make fewer transfers. We support the I-5 alignment for the reasons that we've seen here today. Provides faster, safer, more reliable service with fewer impacts and duplication of the Vine service. Extending light rail to Evergreen Boulevard serves important equity priority areas in the city. And I'm just so excited about all the things the city has done to preserve those naturally occurring affordable areas. It connects to the Vine BRT system and it serves communities throughout Vancouver. The option most seamlessly links C-Tran and TriMet systems, allowing more people to use transit and connecting our two downtowns, integrating our two systems and making transit more convenient. It contributes to the equity and climate goals across our region. We recognize the LPA is just the beginning and to addressing the transit demand in this corridor. And TriMet and C-Tran are continued to our future partnerships that continue to explore expansions that can meet the growing demand. At this moment, we think the program is moving in the right direction, and we're eager to partner on addressing the region's climate and equity goals with the completion of a bridge across the river. Those are Sam's remarks. I will just say for myself, it's been a pleasure to work with everyone here and this leadership table, and to get this far is extremely exciting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve. I see we have a hand raised. President Peterson.
Thank you. I just wanted to join in again. It's so great to get to this point of this conversation where we've got information so we can see the trade-offs. I just want to say I really do appreciate the true partnership between TriMet and C-Tran throughout this project. Also, linking Max Light Rail with the Vine BRT is a big win for thousands of people who want to cross the river every day without driving, and a big win for the region and its efforts towards mobility, equity, and climate goals. So I look forward to the future conversations on how best optimizing the Vine to take advantage of this new connection to best serve the transit agency's shared riders. And just want to also recognize, again, our partners to the north. You've done a fabulous job building out your BRT system, and we are looking to you for thoughts on how to proceed down here in our region as well. Thank you.
Thank you, President Peterson. Mayor Ann McInerney-Ogle.
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you to C-Tran and TriMet. The City of Vancouver obviously is very excited about the bridge program's direction for transit. It supports our community's future plans for growth and development. It serves a number of different identified markets and known demand, and it integrates kind of what we have, that existing and the future modes and investments to better serve our region. It supports all of our goals that we have for climate and equity. But light rail as a mode adds kind of a new and exciting, important option to our toolbox, if you would, our transit toolbox that complements C-Tran's existing and our planned system. So combining light rail with bus rapid transit, with our express buses and our local buses, all going in and out of Portland signals our intent to continue working together as a region to make transit work for all of us, and to get all of the folks where they need to go when they need to do it. So we're all very, very excited about that. And our transit recommendation supports the efforts for our current and the future of downtown Vancouver. We know it's a thriving and attractive place to live, work, and visit. So come on over and play with us, eat dinner with us. We're all part of a greater Portland, Vancouver area, or I should say Vancouver, Portland area.
Thank you so much, Mayor Ann. Are there any other comments or questions? I'm going to pause just a moment. I see that our program administrator has been able to join the call. I want to share with you, Administrator Johnson, that we have had the opportunity to go through the presentations on the auxiliary lanes as well as transit. And so we're now receiving comments from our partners. We are also hoping to move hastily through the remainder of the agenda, given that several people have already begun to fall off, but will continue to fall off over the course of the next hour or so. So we want to try to get in the conversation on the options before that happens, but wanted to pause for a moment to hear from you.
So I just want to echo the comments of the other partners that this has been a tremendous effort in teamwork. So we're getting down to the final strokes to get this to the next phase. So let's go back and get started on the next presentation. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, John, for getting us through that so quickly. And again, to our transit partners for your words of both encouragement and support as we work to advance the work of the program. Now, we're going to shift gears a bit, and John Willis, not just John, but John Willis is going to come back and share with us around the options that we have developed as we look at the modified locally preferred alternative.
Thank you, Millicent Williams. And if you thought that transit presentation was fast, watch me go through this so we can
All right.
time for the other things we need to take care
Put
of.
on your seatbelts, folks.
Okay. We've heard the program and our partners have been talking a lot over the last several months about how do we tell the story about the entire program, and how do we share the program as a holistic set of options. We've talked about interchanges and transit and aux lanes. And I just want to set up the conversation that we'll ultimately use over the next few weeks. And most importantly, on the 5th of May, to describe how we're going to look at scenarios that encompass the entirety of the project. So I'll do this by going to the next slide. So if we look at the scenario development, as we've been saying all along, we've leveraged the prior planning work to get us a jump start on where we are. We've done a lot of work in 15 months to get us to where we are, and including looking at existing data, past studies, and finding a previous design. We've also got the current planning work, the really intense modeling we've been doing since last summer, and you saw the results of some of that when Ryan spoke earlier. In between both of those, we have enough data that we can provide a set of scenarios for all of us to look at as we look at what's the range of holistic options as we talk about this program. So let's go to the next slide. I think it's important to look at these scenarios from a continuum, all the way from the left side of the page there, looking at just some common things. On all of them, we will be looking at replacing the bridge. On all of these scenarios, we are going to look at system and demand management. And when I say that, I'm talking about things like pricing for parking, ramp metering for operations, and demand management in the form of variable rate tolling. We're also going to look at transit on all of these. And given the presentation we just gave, we've chosen to take that transit investment that we shared with you of light rail across the river, I-5 adjacent, with an IBR terminus at Evergreen as something that stays constant through all these scenarios. That said, we are looking to vary some things so that we can ask those what if questions and understand what those mean. And that looks at going all the way from 0 auxiliary lanes to 1 and 2, like Ryan showed you today. These are in addition to the 3 through lanes in each direction, all the way up to 3 auxiliary lanes which was something that was studied in the prior planning effort. The other big change would be Hayden Island and Marine Drive from no interchange to partial to a full interchange all the way, again, looking at this continuum in this spectrum. We've taken a deep dive on the interchanges, the interchange at Hayden Island Marine Drive, which was a change since 2013. And we just finished, in the past, we did that, and we just finished looking at auxiliary lanes. So when we look at this holistically, our team looked all the way to the left at the 0 auxiliary lanes and the no interchange, and found that that didn't meet the purpose and need. And we've talked about that at prior ESG meetings. Again, all the way to the third level, the right hand of the page, 3 aux lanes and full interchange. As we've looked at the footprint of the program and the right sizing that we as a program have promised to do, and climate and equity, we realized that given footprint and climate concerns, that 3 auxiliary lanes on the other end of the spectrum and full interchange should not be moving forward. So if we zoom down to the next slide, or go to the next slide, we really are looking at 2 scenarios that we'd like to have a further conversation as we narrow from where we are today to a recommendation, excuse me, we'd like to make on the 5th. And that includes those 2 in the middle that we've now highlighted green here. So look for more information that will be presented as part of a briefing packet to this group as we move forward to the May 5th meeting. And I'll stop there. Just want to give a highlight, preview, an infomercial, if you will, on what to expect.
All right, that was lightning round speed. Does anyone have any questions for John on the options that we're proposing that we discuss as we move toward making the final identification of the locally preferred alternative that we're going to recommend? Okay.
Okay, thank you.
There we go. I knew I needed to wait a few more seconds. So President Peterson.
Thanks. I just want to say thank you for really starting to think about these scenarios and bringing them before us. The IBR team has been really awesome to work with in order to start being able to think about how these elements can work with or against each other. And I just want to say, while we're all trying to make sure that we identify a project that can meet the needs and balance purpose and need, and the balanced need for more connections to our desired outcomes for racial equity and climate change, we knew from the beginning or restart of this project that it will be a project that has to achieve multiple outcomes. So being able to see all of these options certainly is important. And I guess I would just want to say at this point, in terms of the 2 scenarios, I think bringing forward both of them, trade-offs and benefits, and the information is going to be really important to the Metro Council. So I don't want to weigh in too early, but scenario A seems closest to what the Metro Council has been asking for in terms of outcomes. So I look forward to getting more information on how these potentially play out on the desired outcomes.
Thank you for the council, and we would not be here without the input of our partners in how we portray a holistic program. So appreciate the comments, President Peterson. Thank you.
Thank you, President Peterson. Any additional comments? So that concludes the presentations that we had for today. We are going to move into public comment. We have quite a few folks who are wanting to weigh in this part of the conversation. And so we will run through a few ground rules for that engagement, and we'll get started with that. So comment instructions. To make a verbal comment, if you have joined by Zoom, click raise hand. If you've joined by phone, press *9 to raise your hand. The facilitator, or I, will call on participants, and Brent will also be helping to support that effort. You will receive an unmute request. Please accept it. If you are commenting by phone, dial *6 to unmute. Please provide your name, and affiliation. And attendees will be allocated up to 2 minutes for public comment, depending on the number of commenters, up to a total of 10 minutes. If we run out of time and you have not had the chance to speak, you can still provide comments after the meeting. To submit comments after the meeting, fill out the comment form on program website or email comments to info@interstatebridge.org with ESG Public Comment in the subject line. Call 888-503-6735 and state ESG Public Comment in your message, or all written comments must be received prior to 48 hours in advance of each upcoming meeting in order to be distributed to ESG members. I did provide copies of the public comments that we received within that time frame to all ESG members yesterday afternoon. Comments received after that point will be distributed to members in advance of the next meeting. All comments are posted to the IBR website. And so our first commenter, Brent.
Yes, Karen Gibson.
Okay, yes. Hello?
Hi, Karen, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciated this overview. I would like to state that in terms of you speaking with stakeholders and community members, there's a small group of us who live right here at the 4th Plain interchange. I look out my front door and I look across the street and there's I-5. So from our perspective, what is this doing to our property values? What is this doing to equity in terms of climate change? What are all these things doing to this small community right here that is sitting right here and not being involved in any of this discussion whatsoever? I don't believe any of you live on our street. So I'm just curious as to what you're doing to address this. In the previous 2013 project, you had a real estate acquisition plan. How does that fold into what we're doing based upon the auxiliary lanes? How is that going to affect our house where we live? How does it affect our decisions moving forward? How does it affect our property values? How does it affect decisions making about whether or not we make improvements on our home? What is happening with all of that? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gibson. Our next commenter.
Looks like Dave Rowe.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Mr. Rowe.
Yeah, I'm Dave Rowe. I'm a commuter from Battleground to Lake Oswego. Offshore ocean windmills may be manufactured in Vancouver. Such large structures must have more room than the 116-foot clearance the IBR proposing fixed bridge will have. Large structures are built at Thompson Metal Fab and Oregon Iron Works. Building this mega bridge to remove one stoplight on I-5 is a waste of taxpayers' money and impacts industries on the Columbia River. In 2008, the Woodrow Wilson Drawbridge was built on Interstate 95 to cross the Potomac River. This same type of bridge could be built over Columbia for half the cost and would not affect the industries that's on the Columbia River. Moving the opening on the Burlington Northern Railroad Bridge would eliminate 90% of the I-5 bridge lifts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe. Do we have additional commenters?
Yes, we do. Sarah, and I don't want to try to pronounce your last name, with the Street Trust. There we go.
Good morning. My name is Sarah Iannarone. It's a hard one, and I'm the
Thank you.
executive director of the Street Trust. Thank you for your service on this committee. This is a pivotal project, and we all agree that we need to get it right. I'm stopping by today as a founding partner to briefly introduce you to the Just Crossing Alliance, in which community groups from Oregon and Washington have come together to make sure that the Interstate Bridge Replacement Project has a positive impact on our region's climate outcomes, advances environmental racial, and economic equity, and doesn't adversely impact the finances of either state's transportation system. To date, over 15 organizations from both sides of the river have signed on to our alliance, and the number grows each day. We know you don't consider this bridge project the Columbia River Crossing 2.0, and we don't want you to misunderstand and think that we are here to shut this project down. In fact, we're here to help, and we mean that sincerely. We do not want this project to fail the way CRC did for lack of community support. With this infrastructure investment, our communities are poised for a once-in-a-generation opportunity to create robust transit and active transportation connections across the Columbia River. Our primary concern is ensuring that the decisions you make here don't further disadvantage communities in Washington and Oregon who are already paying the highest costs for our failure to transition from auto and fossil fuel dependence. The Just Crossing Alliance will be organizing in our communities to ensure that Oregonians and Washingtonians' voices are reflected in your decision-making. In addition to uplifting the community, we will advocate for the natural environment, the fish and wildlife and habitats that have existed here for millennia. The Just Crossing Alliance will be working alongside you to ensure that any equity, environmental, and climate gains from our investments are not erased by a big jump in passenger vehicle traffic created by the bridge project. We have enlisted transportation experts who will support you by paying attention to the details, the number of lanes, interchanges, pedestrian access, and public transportation for the IBR project, and so forth. We need a bi-state solution that meets the needs of our diverse communities on both sides of the river with environmental justice and creates a safe and livable future. We've posted our full value statement at justcrossing.org. We encourage you to visit our website and review them along with the quickly growing list of endorsers. Thank you very much, and thank you for your work.
Thank you, Ms. Ayanna Roan. Our next commenter.
That is it for public comments. Nope, we have one more that just popped in.
Okay. Jordan Lewis.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I used to live in Vancouver, specifically Hazelbell, and I had to move to Portland actually because it was just so hard to get across the river and to get where places I wanted to go without having to rely on having access to a car basically. So yeah, I want to keep this short. I just want to say I really stress that we need to reconsider adding additional lanes, even auxiliary lanes, if at all possible. That's basically all I have to say. I'm done for that.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis.
And we might have a repeat, but Karen Gibson has her hand up as well. So let's see if that is a repeat or if it's just a different name.
It is hello, it is the same Karen Gibson, and I did ask a very important question, and I would like to know who's representing us. Who do we go to discuss the situation that's going on right now? It's not like we're objecting to anything about the bridge, but this has a real impact on our life now, future. Do I have to disclose this that's going on if I were to try and sell my house? I mean, this has a real impact, and I don't see anybody here, Mayor Ann or anybody.
Kim, can you bring up the public comment slides and so that Karen has access to that? And Karen, if you could follow up with info@interstatebridge.org for an email, and we can follow up with you as a program staff. Appreciate that.
Oh.
Thank you, Brent.
And thank you to all of our public commenters. Appreciate it.
Well, folks, this concludes our meeting. We were able to make it well in advance of the time, and hopefully everybody will make it to their other engagements on time. Thanks for your patience as we worked through a lot of information. We really appreciate it, but what I believe is important to note is that your teams have been working with the IBR team, as has been mentioned, for the past year and a half plus to discuss, to understand, to parse through information and data. And so we're excited about being able to get to this point and to plan to continue to move forward. Before I talk about what will be happening at the next meeting, I do want to pause once again and ask the program administrator if he has anything that he'd like to share as we wrap the meeting up.
Well, Millicent, we may be a little redundant But the May 5th meeting for the executive steering group, as well as the bi-state ledge, will be the next refining of these two scenarios and taking it down to one scenario that we will propose to move into before boards and councils, and eventually move into the supplemental environmental impact statement process. So the May 5th ESG is going to be the next step in whittling down from these two alternatives after taking into account all of your comments, public comment, also comments from our advisory groups, to then get these down to a manageable scenario, one scenario that we can move forward. So it's going to be, once again, an important time frame, and very busy for the team, as we will be answering your questions that come to us to our technical staff. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And with that, we are going to close today's meeting. Thanks again for your willingness to extend to 3 hours. I'm glad that we were did not find the need to do that. And again, thanks for your patience, your understanding, and we're looking forward to continuing in the conversation as we work toward a solution that's going to meet the needs of this region and all those who would potentially use the facility that we intend to build. So thank you all so much. Have a great afternoon. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.